everybody, and welcome to today's episode of Attendance Bias. I am your host, Brian Weinstein. There are a lot of Phish shows that are seen as turning points in the band's career and the evolution of their overall sound over the past 40 years. Off the top of my head, there's the Paradise in 1988, Gamehendge at Great Woods in 94, New Year's 95, Halloween 96, and dozens more. Those are just the high-profile ones. Because there are also shows that can fit the description of turning points, but don't get the same sort of attention as the ones I just mentioned. Today's guest, Josh Buswell-Charkow, was in attendance for such a show, November 2nd, 1996 at the Coral Sky Amphitheater in West Palm Beach, Florida. The show isn't exactly an unknown. Phish did release a DVD of it after all, but it does get lost in the hubbub of the band's talking head Halloween costume and then the insane Las Vegas show that closed the tour in the beginning of December. The popular narrative often goes that Phish covered Remain in Light on Halloween 1996, played small venues in Europe in the winter of 1997, and changed their sound to the cow funk that we all know and love by the middle of the summer. However, there were little steps in between those touch points, and today's show is one of them. Guest starring percussionist Carl Perazzo for the entire show, the listener can hear the band changing their overall sound almost on the spot by infusing talking head-style repetitive rhythm while purposely making space for the guest star. But there's even more to it than that. Let's join Josh to talk about the best time to be in Florida, the best Phish guest stars, and more as we discuss November 2nd, 1996 at the Coral Sky Amphitheater. Josh, welcome to Attendance Bias. How are you?
Really good. Thanks.
Great. Happy to have you here. Today's show that you chose, November 2nd, 1996 at the Coral Sky Amphitheater, and that's in West Palm Beach, correct?
That is correct, yeah.
All right, so West Palm Beach, I think, I have to double check, this may be the first time a guest has picked a Florida show for Attendance Bias, so that's exciting.
And so many gems, too.
Yes, and they play there so infrequently.
I know, yes, well, we can talk about that, but obviously a very consequential show on the Millennium, so...
Well, yes, of course.
Yeah.
I don't have the guts to work myself up to that one yet. A lot of people have suggested Big Cypress, and I said, I don't even know how to start. There's a much better podcast, what it's called, Long May They Run. There's one out there. If you want to hear about Big Cypress, it's like a doctor who knows that he can't treat you and knows a specialist who can. Go to that other podcast. But anyway, November 2nd, 1996, I wouldn't say an overlooked show, but maybe an underappreciated show for those who don't know. It's not mentioned in the same breath as other great shows, even from 1996, which is sometimes considered an underrated year. It is by me. But this show could really be seen as a turning point in Phish's overall sound, if not their career. I am so thrilled that you came on to talk about it.
Yes, no, I'm really excited. And it's funny you mentioned that because, in kind of preparing for this show, I was reading over some of the reviews and, the Phish community seems a little divided on this one, and I can talk about this, but like when I was seeing Phish, in high school and this show happened, it was like, just like a bomb went off. I mean, it was a huge deal, and then since then, I feel like there's some people who, just like love this show. They think it's like the greatest thing ever. And then some people are like, hey, it seems a little bit overrated. Like, we'll talk about the big jam in the second set. Like, it doesn't really do that much for me. But I'm squarely in the camp. This was a big night for Phish. And it was a big night for me as a Phish fan. So.
Yeah, and that's why you're here. I'm very excited to hear your impressions at the moment, and I can't wait to talk to you a little bit later about the legacy of this show. Because I'm also on your side of that fence of this is a groundbreaking show.
Yeah.
But I don't want to spill too much. I'm going to just go on and on about it.
Yeah.
So, Josh, before we get to the legacy of November 2nd, 96 and Phish in Florida and that whole deal, guest stars, let's hear about you as a fan with the Attendance Bias Lightning Round.
Attendance Bias Lightning Round.
So, Josh, when was your first Phish show, and what do you remember from it?
Okay, first Phish show, April 30th, 1994, The Edge, indoor venue in downtown Orlando. I was in 8th grade. There are a couple things that I remember from it. First is I think it was because the Lion King was coming out. I think that's what triggered it. But as anyone who's listened to it before, and if you haven't listened, you should definitely check it out. They tease The Lion Sleeps Tonight through a good part of the second set. It starts right after Wilson. It gets kind of dark and dissonant. And then I think Trey starts playing it and Mike picks up on it. And then they just run with that for a while into this kind of like, and then it goes into Bowie and there's a little jam there. Anyways, it goes throughout the whole second set. And I just thought that was the coolest thing ever. I also remember hearing Big Black Furry Creature from Mars and being like, what the hell is going on, being in 8th grade, and also seeing Fishman play the vacuum for the first time. So
that's a lot to take in.
Yeah, totally.
And I'm so thrilled to hear you name check that show, because that show, August 30th, 94, I'm sorry, April 30th, 1994, 4/30/94.
Yeah.
When I was first getting into Phish, that was a clutch tape. I only had the second set. I don't know if I've heard the first set yet. I may not have heard it yet, but there are some shows, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about, that are just etched into your DNA from when you're first getting into Phish and before the world of streaming was around, and before you could the spreadsheet was available and you could just get any show you want at the snap of a finger or the click of a button. You had to make do with what you could get. And one of the only tapes that I had was that show. And the same stuff that you're mentioning, the segueing in Possum, where they go, I think the joke is that they play every song they played in the set before Possum during the Possum intro.
That's
they
right.
tease it.
That's right. Yeah. It's very similar to, if you're familiar with the show, I think the only other show where I've heard such a like tease fest is the Roxy from February 20th, 1993.
93, yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of similar, which I think they also do it in Possum there. But yeah, I mean, at the time, just hearing it, I was like, wait, they're playing Axla again, because I had never seen a band like do teases like that. So it's a great show. I mean, the Bowie is great. The jam into the Bowie is great. There's a great McGrupp in it. The Possum's fantastic. There's a beautiful Hood that also does The Lion Sleeps Tonight tease in it, very similar to that one from 92 where they're teasing Linus and Lucy. So yeah, it's a jam. It's a real gem of a show.
You're telling me that there's a really great, beautiful Harry Hood from the Spring 94 tour? I don't believe it. When you could just take them for granted, I know. It really is. I'm going to have you back on. I'm telling you now, before we even get to song 1 of the show you picked, I'm going to have you back on for that show.
Happy to talk about that show. It'll be like a run and riff the whole time.
Yeah. So if that was what, 30 years ago now, right? Am I doing my math right?
Jeez, you are doing your math right. Wow.
So if that was 30 years ago soon, what was your most recent show and what did you think of it?
Okay, so my most recent show was that, I think it was October 18th, 2021 at October 17th, 2021. So I saw them, I live in the Bay Area. I saw them at Chase Center. I got to be honest, Brian, like I still listen to Phish, but when I was in high school and college, like I would have shelled out any amount of money to see Phish, like anywhere, and, now I got kids and they were playing in San Francisco. It wasn't the Greek, it was in San Francisco. And I was like, oh, I'm going to have to go all the way across the Bay to see them. Is it really worth paying, ticket price, face value? And then the day of, I was like, all right, I'm going to go. Because I wasn't able to go. They did a 3-night run. I wasn't able to go nights 1 and night 2. And the day of, I was able to get tickets for like $30. It was $25 before tax. I was like, this is just stupid. Of course I have to do this. So I just went by myself. It was a rainy, cold night too. Even though I had paid $25, I was like, am I really going to do this? But I was thrilled that I went. I had a blast. It was like half full. It wasn't very crowded. When they did the West Coast run, I think. It was it was a 4-song second set. I think Set Your Soul Free. No, it was Evolve that opened the second set. And then I think it was Set Your Soul Free, which was great Chalk to Us. A really tight Reba in the first set. Wolfman's Encore. So I had a great time.
That's something I found, and this is in 2016, I think it was. So 5 years before the show you're talking about, my wife and I did a West Coast run. We saw them 2 shows at the Gorge, and then 3 nights in San Francisco, and then drove down to LA.
Yeah.
And it was not hard to get a ticket for any of those shows.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
those are pristine venues. I mean,
Yeah.
in San Fran, it was at the Bill Graham. And
Yes. At the
that's a
Bill Graham.
small venue.
Yeah, it's not big at all. No, and they've done some great shows at Bill Graham's too. It would have been a different story, I'll tell you, if the show had been at the Greek, I totally would have gone to that. And I tried to go this past year, I couldn't get tickets. So that's it. That's a there's a different demand for seeing them at that venue. But yeah.
Yeah, but the West Coast, and this is nothing new. You know, people talk about East Coast versus
Yes.
West Coast and how it applies to Phish. The pressure just seems to be off. It
Yeah.
just seems to be like in New York. I go to a lot of shows at Madison Square Garden because I live so close.
Yeah.
There's always tickets for the first 3 nights of a New Year's run. New Year's Eve is always high demand.
Yeah.
It's never a given. Usually 28th, 29th, and 30th. People stress and stress and stress, but no one ever gets shut out really of those first 3 nights.
Yeah.
But the pressure is always on. It feels like on the West Coast, the ticket will make its way to you. I mean, unless it's a unique show like the Greek Theater.
Right.
That's only
Yeah, that's
10,000
right.
people in a unique venue.
Yeah, I think that's right. I don't know if it's different like at the Gorge. Probably back in the day it was, but I mean, I think you could do what you did and just kind of show up and be able to get reasonably priced tickets at any one of the shows that you'd want to go to. Yeah.
Well, going a little bit back in time before Phish, what was your favorite band before you discovered Phish?
Okay. When I was thinking about how to answer this, I mean, it's kind of a cliche because I'd probably say it was the Grateful Dead, but I kind of found them at a similar point in life. Like, I was like probably at summer camp, someone was wearing a Grateful Dead t-shirt or something like that. And I just thought that was really cool. But that was probably like 1992 that like I first was like, oh, Grateful Dead, or like I started with Skeletons from the Closet. And I probably liked the Dead more than Phish at the time that I first started getting into Phish, but really like they kind of followed similar trajectories where I like kind of dove deep into the live recordings of both around the same time. You know what I mean? But I would say, I saw my first Dead show 26 days before I saw my first Phish show. Actually with my folks, which is kind of funny.
That's
in
cool.
Orlando. Yeah. I was kind of both of them. I was getting interested in both at around the same time,
So surprise lightning round question that you did not have in advance. This question,
Okay.
all things being equal, what is your favorite Bay Area concert venue? Divided between indoor and outdoor if you want, one for each.
Okay. That makes it easier then. So indoor, actually, I'm a huge bluegrass fan, and the Freight and Salvage is a great venue in Berkeley where I've seen a lot of shows. So if you like acoustic music, it's like the place to go. And there's really not a bad seat in the house. Yeah, and acoustics are amazing. And then for outdoor, I got to say the Greek. I mean, it is, if you've never seen a show there, I mean, it's such a spectacular venue. Again, I mean, the seats are all great. There's just something, living in Berkeley, I can literally ride my bike there and ride my bike home. So I got that going for me too. So yeah, I'd probably pick those two.
And it's on a college campus, so it's very collegiate looking.
That's right. That's
campus.
right.
It's very beautiful.
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
So since today's show, November 2nd, features what is arguably, and I really mean arguably, but could be in the contention for best Cross-Eyed and Painless ever, because it's the first time that they played it outside of the Halloween show.
Yes.
Lightning round question. Pick one song from a Phish Halloween set anytime that they don't play, but you wish they would bring back and play regularly.
Okay, so thought about this one too, and I think that Remain in Light is like one of the great albums of all time. And what's the first cut on Remain in the Light?
So Born Under Punches?
Yes. Oh my God. So the way that they kick into that on the Halloween set, I just think is great. But I think if they could pick one song to bring back, I think it would be Just Want to See His Face from Exile on Main Street, because Exile is just like, might be my desert island disc. And I actually thought when they performed that back in 2009, it was 2009.
Yes, it was in Indio.
Yeah, Indio with Sharon Jones. I thought it fit Phish so well, and they could have grooved that out for a while. I think that would be such a treat if they brought it back. They probably won't, but I think that's the song I would pick.
And finally, everyone's favorite question of the lightning round. You've been seeing them since 1994. What is the weirdest thing you've ever seen at a Phish show?
Yeah, I've seen some weird stuff. And I think the weirdest thing I ever saw was I saw them in Albany, October 10th, 1999. If anyone who's listening to this was at the show, they'll know what I'm talking about. So they closed the first set with a monstrous stash. This could have been like one of the all-timers. I mean, it's kind of a dark horse stash. If you listen to it, you'll still think it's a great version. I mean, I think it clocks in at like 15 or 16 minutes or something like that. And they're just building and building. And you're like, oh my God, this is going to be like one of the all-timers. And then Trey just plays the lick to like, close it down, and just walks off the stage really quickly. And the other bandmates are like, wait, what's going on? And so he left before they did the bow, or if he did a bow, it was really, really fast. And the other bandmates were kind of befuddled, and then they walked off, and we were all like, man, this is kind of odd. So that was, I think, like the weirdest thing I ever saw at a Phish show, to be honest. It was kind of dark times for the band during that era, and it was the last show of that
of the tour.
What was that?
Fall
of the tour.
Tour.
Yeah, before they did the December tour. So, it could have just been that he was just fried. I don't know, but it was kind of odd at the moment.
When was this show played?
So today's show, November 2nd, 96, was part of the fall 1996 tour. The whole tour overall is probably best known for what you just talked about, the Remain in Light Halloween show. I think that's the tent pole of it. But there was a lot of other stuff to be mentioned along with it. So the fall 96 tour consisted a total of 35 shows, which began October 16th in Lake Placid, stayed on the East Coast all the way through the beginning of November, including 2 midweek shows at MSG. Right, I remember very clearly.
I do. Yeah. What's his name came out? Buddy Miles. Yes, yeah. On I think the 22nd or something. It was
the 20. Yeah. Right, the shows were the 21st and the 22nd. Yeah. I remember very specifically because, like you, I was in 8th grade. And I was very excited about Phish. I just got into them the previous summer.
Yeah.
And I wanted to go see those shows. My parents would not let me go to Madison Square Garden for a Tuesday and a Wednesday night show. Yes. So I had to wait a whole nother year until the New Year's Eve run in 1997 to see them live.
Lucky. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, that is lucky. But I thought like, oh my God, I just got into this band. They're playing at Madison Square Garden. It's right here, but
right there.
I was not at that stage of life responsibility or simply at an age where I could just go and come and go as I please to see Phish. But anyway, their first shows at MSG since New Year's 95. So they were feeling confident enough that they could play 2 nights in the middle of the week at Madison Square Garden, right? So it moved and hovered in the Southeast and Midwest for about 2 weeks, including the Remain in Light Halloween show and today's show, before they migrated to the Pacific Northwest toward the end of the month in Spokane, Washington, right? With I forget what song it is, but they tease Eric Clapton, or it's JJ Cale's Cocaine by pronouncing it Spokane.
Yes.
And I'll have to double check that in the fact check what show that is. And then moving down the West Coast and ended with a famous show that was covered on this podcast on December 6th, 96, right, at the Aladdin in Las Vegas. Any show from 96, I always bring up the idea that 96 is often seen as kind of an in-between year, right? 95 was arena rock madness, unpredictability, avant-garde, push the envelope. And 97 famously is Phish Destroys America, Funk Fall Tour, plus the Europe tour before it. But that's been covered. I've talked about it a lot. But this show, today's show, November 2nd, has a special write-up on Phish.com. And I wanted to get your take on this write-up, but also to discuss the legacy that this show has before we go into it song by song. So according to Phish.com, quote, "This was Phish's only show at Coral Sky Amphitheater, which was opened soon before this show in 1996 with a capacity of 19,000. Tickets cost $24.75. Continuing his tenure from Tallahassee and Atlanta, Carl Perazzo played percussion the entire show. After this show, the band and crew traveled 289 miles overnight to Gainesville, Florida. Parts of this show, including Yamar, Cross-Eyed and Painless into Antelope, Waste, Harry Hood, and A Day in the Life were broadcast on, I don't know what this is, the Album Network radio program on or about Halloween 97. The entire show was captured multi-camera by the in-house video crew and was released in October 2010 as a Coral Sky DVD and downloaded live Phish. So what was this venue like that had recently opened at the time?
What I remember about it is, I mean, well, first you got to understand, like, Florida in November is just delightful. I mean, it's so damn muggy and hot so much of the year in Florida. I grew up in Central Florida. So November, it's just, it's kind of crisper. It's still warm enough that you can wear shorts. I'm sure I was wearing shorts at that show. It wasn't rainy. It wasn't a cloud in the sky. It was a beautiful sunset, if I remember. And it's just a big, gorgeous, open amphitheater. I remember a big open lot. I mean, we got there pretty early, so we were hanging out on the lot ahead of time. I doubt it was sold out too. I mean, I would be shocked if it was sold out because it was pretty easy to move around. I mean, I've been to, obviously the Greek we were just talking about, or seeing a show at Shoreline that's sold out, and it's definitely hard to move around. It wasn't like that at Coral Sky at all. It was like a perfect venue for a Florida show. And then the other thing to note, I mean, I'm kind of jumping the gun here, but that was the only outdoor show of the entire fall tour. It was pretty special in that regard. So just to also give another anecdote, I first heard about this show at summer camp. My parents used to mail me the Donny Schweiss, which you might remember. That was like the,
yes, of course,
the little mailer, right? So they mailed it to me at summer camp, and I remember seeing like, oh my God, so great, because Phish hardly ever came to Florida. It wasn't like, the Northeast. I mean, they came, but it was like, a couple of shows here and there kind of a thing. And so seeing that they were going to be in Florida and in West Palm Beach, I had my best friend at the time was living in West Palm. So I was like, oh, this is so great. I'm going to be able to go down and see my friend. And then I remember I came back from summer camp and I was talking to my friend Jonathan, who, if he'll probably listen to the show, but he was like an encyclopedia about Phish, and he was like, Josh, okay, so not only is that going to be the only outdoor show of the tour, but at the time we knew that Carl Perazzo, I think they must have announced it in the Donny Schweiss. He was like, Carl Perazzo, the percussionist from Santana, is going to be actually playing at that show. So you get a double whammy. So we were so pumped to be going to that show. It was really, really exciting. So anyways, it had a lot going for it when it came around.
And you mentioned being home from summer camp. Wait, how old were you at this time?
I was a junior. I was a junior at the time. Yeah.
So you had a car.
I did have a car. Yes.
Okay.
So that was clutch. The year before, when I was in ninth grade, that was like the first year that I actually drove to see concerts with my buddy Jonathan, who I was mentioning before. His brother Daniel was my best friend too. And so we would all go together, and like we went and saw, he drove us to see the Dead in the spring of 95. We drove to see Phish at West Palm the year before in 1995. But yeah, so like by junior year, it was like, this was like a road trip for sure. And there was a bunch of kids from my school who went to that show too. So it was a lot of fun. There was a whole crew of us that went.
I'm sorry if I can't let this go without mentioning, if you went to go see them in West Palm in 95, that means you saw Jimmy Buffett sing Brown Eyed Girl.
Yes, I did. I did indeed. And it was so, and as we'll talk later, so I got to see Butch Trucks play with them 2 times because he also played on the Encore Possum from that show. So
which is also in November.
It was November 16th.
Yeah.
Indeed. Yeah. So that was also really fun because, again, like being able to drive, I think Phish played November 14th in Central Florida. It was a famous show, 11/14/95, Stash Fest in the second set. So I was at that show at University of Central Florida. I think they played on Wednesday night. Thursday night, we went to school. Friday, we drove to West Palm, saw Phish, and then that Saturday night, we saw Richie Havens also in West Palm, which was awesome. So yeah, it was a great time to be in high school.
Isn't it amazing that you can't remember what you have coming up this weekend, but you could tell your week itinerary from 30 years ago?
Yeah, I know, totally. I mean, just such great memories from that time, so it really sticks with you.
So you mentioned, and I mentioned also in the rundown of the fall 96 tour of Carl Perazzo. And it needs to be stated, and you mentioned earlier that this show kind of has lovers and haters, right?
Yeah.
That it's kind of split down the middle. I can't imagine how anyone could not love this show and beyond that, see its significance in the overall development of Phish's sound. Because I think the popular narrative is that when Phish was on their spring or maybe it was winter 97 European tour, when Mike switched his bass and all of a sudden they played that version of Wolfman's Brother, I think with March 1st, that's captured on Slip, Stitch and Pass, that kind of divided them, or not divided, moved them toward their funk explosion, their funk development.
Yes.
But it's also said at the same time that the Halloween show in 96, the Remain in Light, is kind of what gave them a more rhythmic based playing.
Yes. Yes.
So what I see in this show, the first show after that Halloween one, is they could still play like the Talking Heads in a sense. You know, they're Phish, obviously, but they could still play with that rhythmic bass playing. They have a percussionist who can support that, but they're not locked into an album, that they can do whatever they want. So to me, there's kind of this show and Halloween, there's a before and after. I think this show is inextricably linked with Halloween, and I think Carl Perazzo has almost everything to do with it.
Yes. No, 100%. I mean, yeah, I mean, we'll talk about for sure in some of the tracks, but I mean, it's such a rhythmic show and such a propulsive show. And the other thing about him is, you know, they had opened for Santana in the US back in 92. And I think he had played with them a couple of times then. And then earlier in 96, they had done a European tour, right? And he was an opener for Santana. They were an opener for Santana at the time. He came out and played with them on a number of tracks. So he was obviously a little bit familiar with their music. Some of the tunes you can tell when you listen to, so they did four nights with them. Some of the tunes you can tell it's like he's just kind of figuring it out on the fly. Some of them he definitely knows, but he is such an incredible percussionist. I mean, I think as far as like kind of the folks who have sat in with Phish on a few occasions, I mean, he's got to be up there in the pantheon because he brings such an amazing sound to the band, and it adds just another dimension.
Well, we could talk about that a little bit because it's always a thrill, at least in my opinion. I love when Phish has guest stars come on with them. I know not everyone does, but whether it's as recent as Derek Trucks, and a couple years ago in Mexico when Dave Matthews came on. I know that had mixed results from fans. I was there and I loved it. I absolutely loved it.
Yeah.
Or in 1995 when Jimmy Buffett comes on and sings Brown Eyed Girl, a song that neither Phish nor Jimmy Buffett wrote. You know, and so there are guests that are novelties, such as Jimmy Buffett, with all due respect to the man. But there's also guests like Carlos Santana, like Carl Perazzo, that expand the reach of what Phish is capable of and what the listeners are able to picture on top of their music. I feel that way about the Giant Country Horns.
Yes. Yeah, totally. It just adds another, you know, just another level of appreciation when you're listening to it too. It's like you're hearing your favorite band almost being covered by someone else in a different. I mean, we'll talk about some of the tracks, but when you hear it for some of the songs that they performed on November 2nd, you're like, oh my gosh, this is such a different way to approach this song because you have this phenomenal percussionist playing with them and he just gets them to approach the song slightly differently. We were so lucky to be able to hear him perform that night at that venue.
Set 1.
And that enthusiasm comes off right away in the show opening Yamar, which was a nice way, I would imagine, to open the show in Florida, right? Yamar always has this kind of beachy, breezy feeling. It's always wonderful during a Tate-time set also, you know, at a festival, for example.
Yeah.
But Carl Perazzo's contribution is instantly noticeable. And it's welcome. You know, it's not until over a minute in that you can almost tell what song is being played. You're just getting this Latin groove.
Yes.
And then they start Yamar and say, oh, I should have known that.
of dawn. Now that you become a man, looking baby, you got a nice shiny sports car.
Yes. No, I gotta say, so for this show, I don't know if we had front row seats or we ended up in the grassy area, which was at the back. But I think we may have had either front row or second row seats, and we just decided to abandon them to go up to the grass and so we could just dance around. I think that's what happened. But either way, me and my friend Luke ended up in the first or second row for the start of the show. We just ran up there, and the just excitement to hear Phish kick off a show, as you mentioned, it's like Carl Perazzo and Fishman are just, it's just a percussion session going on. And we were all like, what are they even going to play? Like, who knows? And then Trey kicks in, he just slides right into the opener of Yamar. And I, at the time I loved that song. And I still love it. And it's such a it's got kind of even more of a calypso feel to it, and again just kind of like a rhythm, brings out this rhythmic dimension to it that otherwise you might not appreciate with that song. And it's just a killer opener.
And you can even tell when they do the vocal call and response, it was an good pa, an okay. Like, even that's a little looser than usual. And I had the thought while listening to this opener, they must be ready to take all that pent up steam from Halloween. And that it's always good, to when Phish plays Halloween, it's always a good thing. But I can imagine the amount of pressure they put on themselves to perform well. And I remember reading in the Phish bill for the Wingsuit show of all shows, right? Probably the most or the least popular, I guess I should say, in real time, Phish Halloween show, where Fishman says he's never practiced harder for any of their Halloween shows than he did for that one. And then the shows after, the first, November 1st, and 2nd in Atlantic City, were so fun. They were so loose. And that looseness comes through right away in Yamar at this opening. And then by 6 minutes, Trey is playing a solo. All I can hear is cowbell and added percussion. My ears just drift immediately to the percussion.
It's a great song, given Perazzo's kind of Latin influence. It's a great song for him to play on. You can tell Trey is just psyched too. So there's this. The other thing with it being so rhythmic, I don't know, and they're just so loose. The other thing that I noticed with this show is there's just kind of a space to it that Trey just feels like he doesn't need to rush his solos. And his solo on this Yamar, I think it's just it is so picture perfect. It's so lyrical. He just spits off these phrases at the 640 mark. It's I know it so well. I almost want to sing it, but it's just it's like a call and response that he's playing, and it's a fantastic Yamar.
And it's a long Yamar. It's almost 10 minutes, or it might be a little over 10 minutes. Yeah. Whereas, when I was at IT, I think that version of Yamar is 26 minutes.
Right.
Insane thing. But this is a very different version of long. It's the groove is just so thick and solid.
That's right.
It's they just don't want to stop.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's type 1. It's nothing out of the ordinary except for that drum solo at the beginning. But yeah, they're just, it's a beautiful evening. The sun hasn't yet gone down. they've got this killer percussionist Trey. Their band's just having a great time, and you can hear it. Yeah.
And they follow it up with Julius, which is a little closer to the ground, is the way I thought about it. Like easy to follow from a musician's standpoint. And I only listened to the audience recordings for this podcast for a number of reasons.
Yeah.
But I didn't mean this as an insult, because I thought that I don't even know that there's a percussionist. As far as I can tell, this just sounds like Julius. And then around 5.5 or 6 minutes, there's an amazing tension and release guitar run, and then Fishman and Perazza start playing off each other at the same time.
That's right. Yeah, you can hear his congas coming in. He's moving around on a bunch of the different percussion drums for the whole set. But you can hear it really clearly with the congas. And when you listen to, you kind of can't, from 94 to 96, when Julius came in 94, but those 3 years to me are just like peak. Trey's solo was just screaming, like, it was so good and so driving, and such a great like climax, when you finally get to the end. So it's a great Julius too.
And the next couple of songs, Fee and Taste, you realize, or at least I realized as you're listening, just how much influence Latin drum beats have on our favorite Phish songs. I mean, Taste, it's a little more on the nose. Fee is a little bit more vocal focused. But you realize when they play Fee, like, it's no accident that a lot of the songs this set do have that Latin jazz influence on the rhythm. And Taste also. Taste is just right from the start. The extra percussion pays off big time on this one. If you could pick one song to have a Latin percussionist, Taste is like in the first round of the draft picks. Like, take Taste.
So Taste, they played with Carl Perazzo in the spring, right? So this was definitely not his first time performing it with them. So you can kind of hear it, and it's a pretty complicated tune. So you could imagine that Phish there were some songs that they were probably like, oh, you'll figure it out, right? But this one, they were probably like, okay, we think you're really gonna like this one. He just fits like a glove into this performance. Amazing solos, amazing solo from Trey. I kind of wish, honestly, that they had stretched it out so much, because it's a little bit longer, because it seemed like it had even potential to go even further. But for this performance, it was a totally great performance, a great Taste. I will say one little anecdote about the Fee. I think it was right around then that we decided to go meet up with our friends on the lawn. And I remember, as we were kind of running to the lawn, I saw this police officer who was dancing. And like he was like getting down, and I was like, oh my God, like look at this, like here's a cop and he loves Phish. And then it took me 2 seconds to realize he was actually making fun of all of us. And he was pointing to his buddy, and him and his buddy were having a laugh. And I was like, oh, that would have been so amazing. And the fee is, as you were saying, the fee is also great. Carl Perazzo, just, he's got some nice chime effects that he has in there. And they do a little harmonic groove at the very end, which I think they actually used to do that back in the day. I don't know, actually, I can't remember how they wind down fee right now, but it's a little bit unusual. But yeah, I mean, both those pairings were just great for the night.
And they follow it up with, again, kind of like Julius was a little more straightforward blues rock or swing rock. They followed up with Cavern, which is, again, a little more straightforward, kind of a mid-set breather. But it did have kind of what I described as a car crash ending.
Yes. Yeah. So that one is so funny too, because, and I meant to mention this actually with the Taste. So both Cavern and Taste have kind of like this weird ending. And if you can, so they've also, as folks may know, you can actually watch this performance. They did a DVD of it. You can't see, sadly, you can no longer see the Cross-Eyed Antelope on YouTube anymore, but you can find the entire first set. They're probably going to take it down right after I mention this, but you can see the whole first set and you can see parts of the second set. So you can actually see what's going on. And during Taste and at the end of Cavern, Trey is like having fun up there. I think it's a little akin to, my understanding is like with Tab. I never saw Tab. I've never seen Tab, but when they were touring right after Phish's first hiatus, like Trey would sometimes kind of be a conductor up on stage. Mm-hmm. And if you actually watch the recordings, you'll see at the end of Taste, it's kind of like a false ending, and Trey is just going like this, like he wants them to keep doing it. It just goes da da da, and he goes da da da, and it's the same thing with Cavern, where he's doing this weird hand gesticulation because he just wants the kind of dissonance to keep going. I don't know why.
For those of you at home, Josh is doing a lot of strange hand gestures that may not translate over an audio medium. But if you could picture a guy using like 3 fingers doing an L, making L shapes from the top of his head to the side of his shoulder. Yeah, that's what's happening now.
Yeah, and you can see, if you go to YouTube, you can see it online. And then the other part that I think is so fun about this Cavern, which again, like I've listened to this set so many times, and I'm now like a jaded enough fan that like when I go and listen to old Caverns, a lot of times I skip over them, or like at a new, if they were playing it today, I'd go to the bathroom. But like Trey does at each of the ends of the verses, you please wipe it from your shoes. He does this long shoes, and he's kind of singing it with a descending guitar note, and he does the same thing during Fool. You worthless sloppy. He goes like it's a crazy like high pitched squeal. He was just having a great time, I think, that night. So those are a couple of things to look out for in that performance.
And after Cavern is the most sensical. If you didn't pick Taste in your imaginary draft of songs to pick Phish to play with a Latin percussion player, if you didn't take Taste, Stash is up next, which you could hear Perazzo immediately. And this is when I had that thought I mentioned earlier, that it's almost like the horns when they play on Susie Greenberg. Yes. Carl Perazzo playing on this version of Stash, it almost sounds like he always should have been there.
Yes.
And then like you're discovering a long lost track from the original version of the song. Like now when I hear Stash, I'm always going to hear Carl Perazzo, even though he's not on there from here on out.
Oh my gosh, he adds so much. He adds so much to this track. Don't like he's just synced in with Fishman on the percussion, and I guess it's going over to maybe the timbales as they kind of move into a jam. And one of the this has never gotten noticed on Fishnet, but I swear that during the jam when they dive into it, that they start playing kind of like a James Bond riff. I think it's Mike who does it. He does this descending like do 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 do. And Phish was at that point in their career. I mean, they were just so synced in, and immediately Trey locks into it, and they're just going for this ride. And it is. I love Stash at the time. This might have been my favorite Phish composition. They just take this Stash out for a ride. There's a couple of, there's an early peak, maybe like 8 minutes in, and then it builds and builds. And Trey does, this repeating note pattern that just leads to this glorious climax. I mean, again, it's like, as far as like a type 1 Stash from Phish's heyday, you really couldn't go wrong with this version. I mean, it's got everything you need.
Yeah, I agree. My notes say stuff like, at 6.5 minutes, there's a thick wall of sound.
Yes.
And then the same part that you said 8 minutes. For me, it was 8 minutes, 35 seconds.
Yes.
I said major peak with Perazzo beating the shit out of his cowbell.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, he's just, yeah. So it's like, back then, like the band, they were so good at, like, with some songs, just finding like multiple, like, kind of peaks and valleys within it. And I think within this Stash, there's probably like 3 different peaks. And the final one is just screaming. I mean, Trey just takes it to the top. And when you watch the video too, you're amazed that Trey didn't break more guitar strings, because he used to just bend the shit out of that guitar. I mean, it's like the string would be like off the entire fretboard. I mean, it's so unbelievable, the strength that guy had in his fingers. Oh my God.
And after that amazing version of Stash is fan favorite, The Lizards, which, again, we all know it from the melodies and the ending, that guitar line that is probably everyone's favorite guitar line in the world of Phish. But I think this version of The Lizards calls more attention to Fishman's calypso drum beat.
Yes.
And that is because of Perazzo's additions to it. And it's not just that he adds more congas or timbales or cowbells like we've been talking about, but at about 4 minutes, when the song kind of lays down or gets quiet before we get to the do 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 do, he adds wind chimes.
Yes.
Which is a very beautiful effect.
Yes. No, totally. I mean, when you listen, I mean, I've been kind of glazing over some of the little subtleties, but he does such a good job at just finding little fills and like tambourines, which you would never hear with Phish, or like, I don't know if it's like a rainmaker, but you'll just hear him with all of these unique sounds that he brings to the show. And yeah, the chimes is a great example. You'll hear it in a couple of the tracks from this show, but on this one, I think he's mainly on the congas, and he does such a great job during the Page solo is just beautiful. I mean, Page McConnell, like, I mean, he still, I think, plays arguably as well as he ever has. But I mean, this solo, he does just brilliant runs just up and down. And again, you're hearing the Latin influence, and it's got this kind of Barrazo is doing the on the offbeat to Fishman's drum. And again, it's so propulsive for the Page jam segment. And there's so much space to the sound. It's again, like just a perfect addition. You're like, oh my God, it's so great to hear this song with just a world-class percussionist. Adds such a different element to the track.
Yeah, a little earlier, you used the word propulsive to describe what Carl Perazzo adds to this. And you also said that it adds space to it. So it's almost always Trey who's adding the propulsion to the band's sound. And maybe we talk so much about 97 and how the band allows more space for that funk to develop. This is what we're talking about, right? Like this maybe clicked in Trey's head. And I know this wasn't the only show that Carl Perazzo played with them, but maybe this is allowing him to say, I don't always have to be the one.
Yes, totally. No, I agree. It's just, it's like, I don't know, when you've got a rhythmic backdrop like you do for this show, I think it's just, Trey's a little bit more at ease to just, kind of fill in those notes where he just sees an opening. It just works. I don't know. It just works.
It does. It works all the way through. The next song is Free, which is classic 1996. They played it a lot that year. And even in this version, the portion that's usually dedicated to Mike's bass fills, like the
yes, yeah, that's right.
Right, they don't have bass fills here. They're played over by a piano solo, and it goes into this weird, different noise jam. Like a minute later, and to me, it sounded more like Theme from the Bottom than it did Free. There's that kind of mushy noise in the middle, and this is the first time that, to me at least, as early as I could hear, Free kind of goes off kilter.
Yes. No, for sure. It's interesting. Because I should go back and listen to, I totally forgot about how now they do that dun dun and dun dun, and then it's like dun dun, and they have that whole jam and they go in a different direction. And the other thing that's kind of unique about this Free to me is that it gives a hint of what's going to come with the Cross-Eyed, because, and you can watch this on the recording. So Trey, basically, as soon as they finish with the Free, and then maybe they do one of the dana, and then he immediately is teeing up his pedals, right? And he gets them to where he wants them to be, and then he immediately goes over to the drum kit, right? And so what you have is just this like kind of wall of sound with these, laden effects, and Page is doing, again, these keyboard runs that are really, again, they're kind of like dissonant. It's clashing with the guitar sounds that Trey is making. Trey's not, it's just all like effects. He's just playing effects with his feet, I assume. And then he's just playing his mini percussion kit, right? And so it's really Mike and Paige who are in the driver's seat as far as kind of the melody. What melody? I mean, it's hardly a melody, but it just works. Again, it's like this kind of wall of sound that comes at you, and it gives again a hint of the direction that they take in the cross set, I think, in the second set.
Absolutely. And that Mike and Paige team up is so rare. You know, you pick what two band members do you often hear play together? You know, Trey and Phish is the obvious, or Trey and Mike, but Mike and Paige, that's unusual.
Yes.
But this is I agree. This is an amuse-bouche. It's a taste, a sample for what's coming later on in the 24-minute long Cross-Eyed and Painless. But they're already at the end of the first set, which is a song that could take the percussion or doesn't necessarily need it, but it's old classic, Johnny Be Good. And the first thought I always have, whether it's New Year's Eve 95 or the version on this show, I always think it's almost insane or crazy how fast they play this song. Like, what's the point? Is it just, is it just a little kid with his, Godzilla toys stomping on everything?
Well, Trey, at this time, he was such a, like a guitar god. I mean, it was just, everyone was just so floored by what this man could do. And I think this was just his chance to just show off and just our jaws just on the floor. One thing though, before we get into this, one thing that was so cool, that was just a validation for me was before, and you can watch this on the DVD, before he gets to this show, he introduces Carl Perazzo. He's like, we've been like trying to do this for 4 years. We are so psyched to have him, which again, like for everyone who's there, we're like, yes, this is like a really special show. Like you can tell the band is feeling it. And then he's like, and the other thing, this is the only outdoor show that we're doing this tour, and this is just incredible. We're loving it. And so, again, it's just, we just felt like we were just, all witnessing something special that night. We were all feeling it. But, and then they kick off Johnny Be Good. The interesting thing to me too about the way that Phish used to do Johnny Be Good is Trey just, being like doing, super fast blues runs all over the neck. But, as he was wont to do at the time, like get really kind of dissonant and like kind of take it out there a little bit and then lead to just this screaming climax. And this is a great example of it too. It's just a fantastic Johnny Be Good. Oh, and then the other thing that you can see on the DVD, which I was watching today, is Fishman literally breaks a drumstick on this at the end. And
I'm not surprised.
Yeah. I mean, and you can tell, I mean, that, Fishman, again, I mean, he was such a drumming god at the time too. My God, the fills that he could do, and he would just pound the crap out of those drums. And you can see it at, when and you can just see one of a little bit of the wood on one of his drumsticks fly off, and he keeps playing. I mean, it's so amazing.
Hi, everybody. Brian here to welcome you to the set break of today's episode of Attendance Bias. First, thank you for listening. And second, just a quick reminder to tell you that even though Attendance Bias comes to you for free, it does take a lot of work and it does take quite a bit of money to keep the lights on here at production. So I just wanted to ask a small favor if you could support the podcast in any number of the following ways. If you could leave a review or a rating of it on whichever podcast app you use. If you could spread the word, telling a friend or someone you think may be interested in it about it. Or probably the most concrete way is to go to www.buymeacoffee.com/attendance bias and donate however much you can financially to help with the continuing costs of attendance bias. So thank you again so much for listening, and I hope you enjoy the second half of today's episode.
Set 2.
The second set begins with Cross-Eyed and Painless. The first time, obviously, it's played after Halloween, beginning a long career of incredible jams to this date. I do believe that it is listed by Phish.net as the second most teased song in Phish history, and it's only second if you count Dave's Energy Guide, which
Right.
I am convinced that is part of some sort of conspiracy, is a song that doesn't actually exist, but people at Phish.net just pretend to hear it every now and again, and they add it as Dave's Energy Guide. Anyway, Cross-Eyed and Painless is a monster in the Phish canon, in the Phish history. When we write the book to end the about Phish's career, it deserves its own chapter.
Totally. Yeah,
This is
Cross-Eyed.
obviously, right? So this is the first version of it outside of the frame of a Halloween show. And arguably, like I said at the very beginning of our conversation, the best, certainly one of the best. Like he warms up the riff before counting off the song.
Yeah.
And the percussion adds a ton to this because we've already heard it in Halloween. Although at the time you probably didn't, because tapes did not travel that fast.
Right. When they come out, it's kind of shocking in hindsight, given how consequential this jam is to like Phish, the trajectory of Phish, but they weren't actually set on playing Cross-Eyed and Painless, it seems, when you watch the DVD. So they come out, you can maybe hear Trey say, like, should we play Jim? And then I think he says something like, let's do Cross-Eyed. And then I think he must be talking to Perazzo. He goes, you know that one? Da-da-da, da-da-da, and then still waiting. He kind of does it. And so you can hear when he's kind of teasing that lick, and then 1, 2, 3, 4. And the way that they launch into this track, I mean, it's just like Halloween, where it just feels like just being shot out of a cannon. I mean, it is 0 to 60, like instantly. And you can immediately hear Carl Perazzo, the da-da-da, 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 like the metronome. Being there at the time, so one, I didn't know Remain in Light, and then two, I was just like, what is this? And most people, I would venture to say most people that were there didn't know what they were hearing, right, at the time. We were just kind of gobsmacked, like, what is going on here, And then it kept going on. I mean, we're kind of jumping ahead here, but then the fact that it kept going on and on and on, it was like, we're seeing one of the most amazing jams that Phish has ever played. Like, that's how it felt. And we're like, and what is it? What is the song that we're listening to here? Like, we don't even know,
Well, that's the thing, to remember the context and the time period in which this was played. When Phish plays a Halloween show now, and it's been their MO in the last couple of years to just play a goddamn whole new album.
Yep.
But anyway, they play a whole new album on Halloween before the set is even over. people are already talking about, where do you think in the set list this song will fit? I can't wait till they break open Egg in a Hole, or where do you think The Very Long Fuse is going to be?
Yes,
is that going to be a show opener?
Which is going to come back. Yeah, that's right.
Right. But in this time, in this place, you were lucky if you got a tape within a couple of months.
Oh, for sure.
So people who were not fans of the Talking Heads or didn't know the Talking Heads in general, this is, like you were just suggesting, a brand new jam, a brand new song that all of a sudden they seem to have an expert control over it.
Totally. Yeah, no, it's kind of funny because I now love the Talking Heads, but I don't think I'd even heard the Talking Heads version of this until I got to college. But I like spun this tape on repeat, I mean, I loved this performance. And certainly none of my friends, like, we were just listening to this, like, I don't think we even knew that they had covered Talking Heads from 2 nights before,
you only had 48 hours to find out.
You had 48 hours, and like, you could have, at the time we were like, I was, I'd gone down to West Palm, I was hanging out with my friends all day, like, I had school the day before. So I probably hadn't even logged into Phish.net to see that they had covered the Talking Heads. And the truth is, even if I knew that, it wouldn't have even meant anything probably.
Right.
To me,
it wouldn't have triggered, that means they played that means they played Cross-Eyed and Painless.
Right. Exactly.
It doesn't have that same trigger.
Totally. And the other thing too, like, at the time, it's like we didn't have like Spotify or like Apple Music. And so, like, for me to even go out and, like, I would have had to go out and buy the CD, which was probably like $16 at the time. So anyways, no one, I would say probably maybe 5% of the people that were there, that's being generous, knew what they were listening to at this time. But you could just tell that this was something special as soon as it kicks off, Oh,
absolutely. I mean, Fishman, he's a little off on the lyrics, but he's also Fishman. Had a minute and a half, lots of yelps and verbalizing, like, like stuff like that, like there was during Halloween. Which shows how much fun they're having. And the way I describe this, I think I'm going to save this phrase for something in the future. I wrote melodically unhinged, yet rhythmically tight at 6 minutes. Yeah. And the percussion just opens up so much room for Fishman and for all the band members. Like, Mike holds on tight a little bit later. Paige has the opportunity to take control. And then it goes back to that wall of sound, sort of, that you said was hinted at during Free.
Yes.
At about 13 minutes. I wrote that everything was bubbling like crazy.
Yeah. So to me, again, this is where, like, I think the haters of this jam will be like, oh, it's kind of like type 1, right? They're just staying within the, the rhythmic framework. They're not doing anything. But, like, to me, there's actually a couple of different movements to this jam. And I do think that even today, it's a different sound, even though this in a lot of ways was kind of like, foreshadowed 97. It's also very different than the sound of 97. It more reminds me, honestly, of like Miles Davis, like fusion jazz in a lot of ways, right? But so to me, there's the first movement, which was essentially just, the Talking Heads version, right? Where it's like the guitar, the solo that Trey does at the beginning, where he goes, that's like straight from the recording, right? It's very honest. And then it goes to a longer, I think, solo for Trey. And Trey's solo, it's again, he's got a lot of space to work with. And you would think, you've maybe heard like the the big Cypress version of Cross-Eyed, right? Where like he builds it to his peak in his guitar solo. On the first solo that he does, and really actually for all of Cross-Eyed, he's not really building it to like the kind of classic Phish climax that you think of Trey doing, where people are just losing their mind, like the tension and release. But he has all these kind of little mini builds, and it's really kind of dissonant sound. And so that's like the first Trey section where he kind of takes it for a spin. And I think he wraps up his solo probably at like the 8 or 9 minute mark. And then it pivots to Page, who takes his first solo. And that's where that's like the premonition from Free, where Trey then gets on his kit for the first time. And so now you've got a band where it's Page and Mike who are really leading the song, you know, as far as the melody. And you've got 3 percussionists. And so Page is doing all these cool sounds with like, you know, like a clavinet and like a Rhodes sound. And then I think the next phase to me is where Trey comes back, but he doesn't start on like playing notes again. It's more like he's making this sonic soundscape with his guitar with different effects. So first he's starting, you know, just all these different like kind of clashing, you know, again, it's like effects. That's the only term I can use. And then eventually he switches over to kind of strumming. And for probably a couple of minutes, he's just going whack, whack, whack.
Yeah, on the wah-wah pedal.
Yeah, with a wah, but he's not actually playing notes. He's bringing his pick across the strings, but he's not actually playing any chords. And he's not playing any notes. He's just rhythmically using his guitar, which again, it's all really interesting. And that gives, I think at that point, when he moves over to that phase, then it kind of gives Mike some space to lead with just the bass. So it's like they're all getting their chance here. And Mike then starts kind of doing these different tonalities with the bass, where it's, you know, he's veering for the first time from the boo-doo, and then he kind of moves to like do 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 do, and he's just moving around. And I've read subsequently that he wrote in his journal after the show that like he had a moment during this jam, and you can imagine him just getting totally into this into this performance. So
Yeah, everybody,
yeah,
everyone is putting forth their best effort. And the way you were describing this jam, when you said like soundscapes and adding little bits instead of a
yeah,
solo, to
yeah,
me, it sounded like you were describing a jam from the Fall '99 tour
yes,
or 2000, for example.
yeah,
So forget, a premonition of Fall '97. They were skipping ahead 3 years,
totally.
1999.
Totally. I mean, I mean, again, it's such a propulsive jam where you got all of these different sounds, these kind of dissonant sounds coming together, and each band member is kind of doing their own thing. And so then after the mic part, then to me, the final section is they come back to singing "Still Waiting." So
Yeah, at the
it
very
kind of
end at
winds
21
down at the
minutes.
very end. That's right. Yeah. It's like 20 minutes, and Fishman kind of comes in. He's like, "Still waiting." You hear Trey just go. They go back and forth, and finally he goes, "I'm still waiting. I'm still waiting." And then Page does this, like he like bangs on the piano, and at the time, that's like the as close to kind of a peak that you get during that song, because you can hear it in the recording, and I remember it at the show where as Trey's going, "I'm still waiting," everyone starts just screaming in the audience. They're just losing their minds because we've just been through this 20-minute journey, and we're just like, what are we witnessing? What the hell is going on?
I think that's for the guys and girls who are all the way on the back of the lawn and need their space staring up at the sky.
Yeah.
I think that's who that's for.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. But and so yeah, so then they just, they have this like still waiting part, and then it kind of winds down. And at the very, very end, you can hear Fishman. And I don't think he's ever done this since. At the very end, he goes, "Have you waited long enough?" And like it's like a coda that it just ends at that point. Oh, amazing.
And it melts right into Run Like an Antelope with an enormous cheer as the crowd
Yes.
realizes what's being played. There are big, again, I hate to overkill this, but Talking Heads vibes at 4 minutes, because there's barely any of the normal guitar craziness that you might expect during Run Like an Antelope. And yet another, I use the phrase wall of sound again at
Yes.
7 minutes. And Trey just kind of peaks above, his guitar does, just peaks above and around the sound. Like
Yes.
they're developing this physical being of sound that's not really traditional rock music, even as Phish defines it.
Yeah.
And so Trey's there, but he's not leading it. And the way I described it, it's as if sound is a lightning bolt highway. Like it's just, forget the HOV lane. This is
Yeah.
literally a lightning lane. And then they kick gut up to double time at 9 minutes. And then there is the typical Antelope
Yes.
insanity.
Yeah. No, totally. It is
Yeah.
so one thing I will say about this, like at the show, we were just, when Cross-Eyed ends, we were just like, what the hell did we just see? And at like the first like hint of Trey doing the like it had just come in. I remember my friend somebody saying Antelope. I hear it, and we were all like, "Oh my god!" Because to me, it was my first Antelope. It was like as soon the first hint. And the other thing that's pretty interesting about this Antelope, I mean, there's a lot to me. I think this is one of the all-time great Antelopes. It starts so playful. Trey is, it really sounds like when you're listening to this, like it sounds like this like antelope, like frolicking, on the plane at the beginning, like very light playing from Trey. And then just kind of taking his time, a lot of space. And then right after the the first solo, Trey has the opening sequence to his solo is one of, to me, like my all-time favorite, like 20 or 30 seconds of Trey Anastasio, because it's the first time that he's really gotten to play a sequence of notes for the second set. I mean, he hardly was playing notes during Cross-Eyed, and he just has this killer run. And then he kind of, and you can, in the video, you can see him going, yeah, because Perazzo is getting on some, like his congas or something. And he does this riff where he goes, dun bum, and just squeals. And it's just, oh my God, it's just like, the heavens opened up when he played that. And then from there, like you say, it's just a totally dissonant, chaotic antelope where they are just living and breathing the tension, and they're just taking it out for a ride, for like 4 minutes until they get to the double time. And then there's just like 2 or 3 just massive peaks. The final one, we didn't even know what was going on. We were just losing our minds.
And this is still the opening of the second set. It's only 2 songs in.
It's 2 songs in. The other thing I remember from this show, after he finishes, and again, there's like 2 or 3 different peaks, and you don't think that they can possibly build any more for that final peak. And yet Trey still finds some space to do it. And as soon as that's done, and then they get into
Yeah, after they introduced Norton Charleston Heston.
Yeah. Norton Charleston Heston. People, I swear to God, there was a crew of people that literally started running down the hillside. These dudes just came out of nowhere, and it was just this whole entourage, and people were just running around in the grassy area because there was just so much energy. A remarkable antelope. But yes, the Norton Charleston Heston was so funny. I don't know. The only thing I can think is that they had played in North Charleston a couple of nights before. So maybe that's where the inspiration is. I'm not sure. But then I looked up, he calls Fishman Norton Charleston Heston a couple of other times after this show. Or no, he does it once in, I think it's Gainesville maybe, and then once at that Kentucky show on November 7th.
Oh, in Lexington.
In Lexington, yeah, right. I think right after Bike, when he's introducing Fishman or something, he calls him Norton Charleston Heston. Yeah, I don't know.
Let's throw it on the pile of Fishman nicknames. And we finally get to cool down with a breather, with Waste. Yes. And I think we could all use it before they go right back into Insanity. Well, this isn't really Insanity, but they play Harry Hood, at least when it comes to setlist fan favorites. Yes. Yeah. And this to me sounded more like a back to basics Hood. The whole show has been expanded by Carl Perazzo. There is added percussion here, but it's more kind of in the vein of Lizards, where it's more atmospheric as opposed to rhythmic. So again, there's wind chimes here, and at about 10 minutes, it's just that 3-chord progression, but there's something magical about the sound.
Yes, no, totally. It's one of these examples where he does just these wonderful little fills during the Trey solo. There's a lot of space, and he has this like offbeat where he goes da 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 Ta ta ta. You'll hear it, if folks listen to it after this recording. And it's just such impeccable musicianship. Some people really like this hood. To me, there are definitely better hoods that are out there, but it was just so perfect for the night. Trey just takes his time. Sometimes Trey will play a lot of licks, right? A lot of notes, runs of notes. And sometimes he's almost kind of making chords and then just kind of moving his fingers around, but it's mostly like chordal patterns. And I would say like the first part of his solo, that's all he's doing. He's kind of adding these different phrasings, just adding some color to the tune. And it isn't really until the 10-minute mark where it starts to get more propulsive that he finally starts playing kind of like a classic Trey solo.
That's when it launched for me. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And he hits this series of notes and he kind of repeats them. And it's just, again, it's just glorious. So it doesn't like, it's not like it's a peak like an Antelope peak, but it was so perfect for, whatever, a Saturday night, a beautiful Saturday night in Florida. It was like a perfect song to wind down the set with.
And we are winding down the set because next they play A Day in the Life, which is classic 95, 96.
Yes.
And then very
Yeah.
sporadically thereafter. And Sweet
Totally.
Adeline, which my thought was they sing Sweet Adeline maybe just because they can. I don't know.
Yeah.
It seems like A Day in the Life is a good exclamation point.
Yes.
What chord in rock and roll history is better than that last chord of A Day in the
no,
Life?
it's a good point. Yeah,
But Sweet Adeline, just because they can, just for
totally.
fun.
And they used to love to do, and I don't know to what extent they still bust it out these days, but they used to love to do the a cappella stuff. And even though this was in an amphitheater, they did it. And one thing, again, if you watch the DVD, you can see before they all get together, it's the first time they're all together talking after the jam. And you can see Trey, you can hear him talking to Mike, and he says something like, "That's still waiting jam. Oh my God, that was a fucking jam." He said something like that. Like, you can tell they were just so pumped about the set of music that they just played. And then they play Sweet Adeline, and until the encore.
Yeah, the encore is Funky Bitch, which is a bit slower and looser. I didn't
Yes.
realize when I was listening for the first time that Butch Trucks is on drums.
Yes,
I didn't
totally.
realize it. I just thought it was
Yes.
a little bit slower version of Funky
Yes,
Bitch.
yeah. So again, Butch had played with them. This wasn't a surprise to me for a couple of reasons. One is that Butch had played with them last in '95 before Jimmy Buffett, right? He played Possum with them at that show. And then the other thing is that I actually was friendly with Butch's daughter. And so I think we got word that he was going to play with them, or he was hoping to sit in with them. And I think I knew that he had taken them out fishing that day. So also you can see on the DVD before Funky, on the DVD before Funky Bitch, Trey talks about, Butch took us out fishing. You should have seen the size of the fish that we caught. And Butch I love the Allman Brothers too. And he has such a distinctive drum sound. Like I can just spot it, And so it's amazing to hear this. So I think on this, Fishman was playing Trey's kit. So it was Perazzo, Butch on Fish's kit, and Fish on Trey. And it's a great Funky Bitch. Right at the end, I don't know if you picked this up, right at the end before I guess maybe it's right before they do a little drum solo. You get a little like 97 funk, there's a little wah in there, and Page doing his clavinet. So yeah, it's a great encore.
Josh, thank you so much for coming on today to go through this mega Phish show. This felt like a milestone in a way. For people who haven't heard it, especially fans of Fall 97, it's almost impossible to hear this show and not make the connection. Also, if you're familiar with the Halloween 96 in Atlanta, but this has been such a joy to break down this show that, people are aware of it. It's well known, but it's still, in terms of legacy, I think kind of flies under the radar. Yes. And I had such a great time talking with you today, kind of picking it apart a little bit and kind of connecting the dots.
Yes.
That's something we don't always get to do. So thank you for giving us the opportunity.
I hope that if I can inspire people to appreciate the greatness of this show after this interview that we do, I'll have done my job. It is an absolute jam. So make sure to give it a listen.
And that's it for today's conversation with Josh. And although we did name check a lot of different Phish shows and Phish facts, we got to make sure we got them all right. So now it's time for today's attendance bias fact check.
Attendance bias fact check.
First, I was correct that today's show is the first and only, to date, Phish concert from Florida that's been chosen for this podcast. The Harry Hood that had teases of Linus and Lucy was played on April 18th, 1992 at Stanford University. When talking about getting into the Grateful Dead, Josh mentions that he saw the Dead very soon before his first Phish show. That Grateful Dead show was on April 4th, 1994 at the Orlando Arena. According to the Orlando Sentinel, things got, quote, a bit out of hand at that show. Apparently, around 400 fans tried to crash the gate. A half dozen or so fans made it inside the Orlando Arena before police confronted the crowd and herded it into a nearby parking lot. According to the newspaper, some deadheads called the police Nazis, pigs, and scum. A police officer got on the bullhorn with a request saying, "One more time. You need to leave, folks. We are going to deploy gas. Please dissipate." There was no dissipation, so police tossed cans of pepper spray to expedite matters. Nobody was seriously injured, there was almost no damage, and only one arrest. Also, a 21-year-old man was charged with filing a false police report. He told the cops he'd been separated from his 2-year-old daughter, but according to the newspaper, it turned out he didn't have a daughter. The guy was on LSD. Phish's show in Spokane, Washington was on November 22nd, 1996 at the Spokane Arena. The cocaine/Spokane tease was during Julius in that show. And finally, I said that Phish played Free many times in 1996, but I guess my memory is skewed by how many times I've listened to the shows and tapes from that year. It turns out they played the Billy Breathes track just 11 times in the calendar year of 1996. And that's it for today's episode. I'd like to thank Josh for joining me today, Phish.net for its help with the fact check, Phish.in for the recording used in today's episode, and the Mockingbird Foundation for everything they do for children's music education. If you enjoy Attendance Bias, please support the show by visiting www.buymeacoffee.com/attendancebias and donating anything you can to keep production going over here. You can also follow Attendance Bias on social media. Thank you again for listening, and I'll see you next time on Attendance Bias.